And we can talk about this book specifically, A Fisherman's View. Most of my books are Cape Cod based. So they're all stories that weave, trips to Cape Cod. So real quick, as Lisa said, I started writing probably about 10 years ago. So it was like 50, just at that 50 mark. When my kids and my money went to college and the house was quiet and there was nothing else to do in the mornings. I wasn't driving the kids to schools and picking up laundry, and everybody was off building their lives. And I always liked story. So what happened was I went to BC High. I grew up outside of Boston in a town called Watertown, which is near Newton and Cambridge. And I went to BC High, and one of my buddies from high school, very successful ad agency person, very creative, and he was a writer. And he wrote a movie, and it got made. It was a small independent film, and he had it play at the Tribeca Film Festival. So friends of ours we all got on a train. We went down to New York. We went into this really cool hotel. It was just a screening for his movie, and leather couches and free drinks. And it was like, this is really cool. And suddenly the lights dimmed, and my friend leans over to all of us and says, "Shh, my movie's about to start." And I go, "Oh, that's cool. Like I want that moment. I want to write a movie, and I want to tell everybody to be quiet because my movie's about to start." So we talked about it, and my friend kind of gave me some books to read and ideas of how to write a screenplay. So my whole writing history started writing screenplays. So I had an idea, and the first screenplay I wrote was a story called Crossing the Sagamore. And so I took a class, and I read some books on screenwriting, and the thing about writing is it's just putting, I know it sounds simple, it's just putting pen to paper, but it is just trying to get your images and your ideas onto the paper. Just write every day. I don't know if you're going to write well every day, but at least write. So by writing the screenplay, it gave me a formula. Writing a screenplay is like a movie that plays in your head. And it's very process driven. It's very formulaic. It's got to be between 90 and 120 pages. By page 10, there has to be an inciting incident, which is this happens to project the movie forward. By page 30, there needs to be a B story. By page 50, there's an all is lost moment. So a movie and a screenplay, they all follow the same formula. And if you know it, for everything from any Disney movie to any Marvel movie to Gone with the Wind, they all follow this: I love you, I hate you, I'm never going to fall in love again, and they fall in love again. So it's very formulaic. So I wrote this screenplay, Crossing the Sagamore, and started sending it out to Hollywood. I went old school, like sending letters, licking stamps before COVID. Like you could lick things and send it in the mail. And I just sent it out. And I sent out a what they call a log line and a synopsis. So the log line is just, it's taking your whole 200-page or 150-page story and condensing it into one sentence. And all of Hollywood lives on a pitch, right? Like the Titanic. Romeo and Juliet meet on the Titanic. Boom, I'll buy that, great. So everything had to get down to a sentence. So I sent the log line, I sent the synopsis, here's a quick story. And so the funny thing is, my friend who had made this movie, he toiled for years in Hollywood, like pushing his ideas and pushing stories. I send out one log line, one synopsis, and I get a producer, which was good and bad. Like the good thing is, okay, now they've given me the drug. Like now I love this. Oh my gosh, I'm going to make movies and this is going to be Hollywood. I call my wife, Michelle. I'm like, pack your bags. I'm leaving. I don't know where you're going, but I'm going to Hollywood. So they bought it. And Hollywood is just this whole land of soft yes. Like, we love your story. We want to make your story. Nobody ever wants to say no to your story because they never want, I'm not saying my story is Jaws or Raiders of the Lost Ark or anything like that. But they never want to be the producer that said no, like you said no to crossing the Sagamore. Are you crazy? So they all give you the soft yes. So I got in touch. It got optioned by a couple of producers. And I spent like 3 years. They spent 3 years just beating the story up and making me really think about character development. And that's the big thing about writing stories. They made me take a step back and really dive into the characters. So any movie you see, any book you read, you have to love or hate the characters, like really quickly, okay? So within the first, in a screenplay, within the first 10 pages, I like this guy. I'm rooting for this guy, or I hate this woman. I want her to fail. So I want to continue the story to see if my initial reaction comes true. So these producers would be, so the story of Crossing the Sagamore, it's a road trip buddy comedy where these guys go to Cleveland, Ohio, and it's all based on a true story. And they get his body and bring it back to Cape Cod for the funeral he always wanted. So it ends up, they give him a Viking funeral over here on Lewis Bay. So the story was great and I was really happy with it. But then the producers just, they come at me and they go, well, so when they get to the Cape, whose house do they stay in? And I'm like, I don't know. Or they go, when they're driving, who's in the passenger seat? And I'm like, really? Do people, like, do you sit in the movie and raise your hand and go, I don't understand why, and it was really frustrating. But what I found is they go, okay, well, this helps me understand the character. Who's sitting in the front seat? That means they're the best friend of the person driving, or who's the power player that gets them into the house when they get to the cave. So you need to know all the sides of your characters as the writer. So for another example, in Crossing the Sagamore, I won't give anything away. The books are free, by the way, so you can take the books and read the endings. But in this story, the main character dies of an overdose, right? He has a drug problem. They bring his body back. So one of the producers asked me that death, that drug overdose, was it an overdose? Was it an accidental overdose, or was it a suicide? And I told them, I don't know. I want the audience to I want it to be mysterious, right? Like, the thing I really enjoy of going to a movie is kind of walking out with questions of like, I wondered what were they thinking, and kind of sit after the movie, let the movie sit with you for a few days, and you don't really know the answers. So they got me to really think about character. Who, did he kill himself? That's a big difference. If he committed suicide, that's an act, that's a decision. If he overdosed, that's an accident, and he didn't mean to do it. So it gave the story, it flipped the story on its end. So working with them really helped me understand how to develop characters, okay? So I wrote Crossing the Sagamore. They loved it. Hollywood's great, but I have to keep writing. So I continued to my next story, which was The Crossing Guard. And so, by the way, Crossing Sagamore is based in Dorchester. I went to BC High, so I got a lot of my stories are Irish, Catholic, guilt-ridden, passive-aggressive, a lot of Catholic guilt. So The Crossing Guard is based in Southie. And the way I write my stories, I guess a lot of people would say their stories come from an idea. Like, I want a hero to, storm the castle and get the queen or whatever. Mine come from an image. And because I write as if I'm writing for a movie, so I see a scene and I go, oh, yeah, because so for example, so the Crossing Guards. This is a story about my next door neighbor, two of my neighbors when I lived in Medfield, Massachusetts. One neighbor he's a Marine Corps veteran. So he's Don Hayes. He's probably 89 years old now. When I first met him, I had just moved into town. He's outside raking leaves. It's probably about 20 years ago. So he's in his 60s. He's a strong, elderly gentleman. and he's got a United States Marine Corps shirt. So I go up to introduce myself. I'm like, Bernard, I just moved in. So I look at him, I go, oh, you used to be a Marine. Wrong thing to say. He's like, I didn't used to be a Marine. I am a Marine. I was like, wow, okay. So then we just got to, and he's great. He's a big fitness guy. Even in his 80s, he was still running. And one day I was driving through Medfield, and it actually wasn't dawn, but it was a snowy day. And there's a guy, he's probably like in his 60s. He's got a big leather weight belt, like from a gymnasium. He's got an old leather weight belt wrapped around his waist. He's got a chain behind him attached to a car tire, and he's jogging in the snow, pulling the tire. Boom. I go, that's my image, right? That's a great opening scene in a movie. So I rush home. I go, Dawn, you're going to be in this book. You Marine are going to be in the book. And then my other neighbor across the street is a nurse who originally worked at Paul Newman's Hole in the Wall game with kids with terminal cancer. Then she became a hospice nurse. Now she works at Dana-Farber with children terminal cancer. I mean, just an amazing woman. And I'm like, Amanda, how do you go to bed at night? Like, how do you stay motivated? Like, you surround yourself with death. So I took the two of them and I go, this is a great story. Let me take that first image of a man running a tire, pulling a tire, who never thinks he's going to die because he's a Marine. And I've got Amanda, who helps people cross over. So I morphed them into a story. And I sold my second story. Again, Hollywood, oh, we love it, we won't make it. So and that was fun. And actually this Crossing Guards will be, that's the one I'm most optimistic about. It has a director attached to it. And it's just a beautiful story. I know I wrote it. But about, it's about the military, and it's about elderly, and it's about people crossing over, and about hospice nurses. And it's funny. So I sold it to this director, Cayman Grant. And, once you sell something, you kind of give up the rights to it. And I don't have enough like Hollywood chutzpah to be, look, this is my story. You're not changing anything. I'm Mike Bernard from Medfield, originally from Watertown. You keep the story as is. So no, once they take it, I could go to the movie theater and Dawn Hayes has become a vampire, that falls in love with somebody, and it could be totally different. But she took the story and she's really reworking it, but she's making it better. But it was funny. I went home to Amanda, the nurse, and she's like, when's the movie going to be made? When's the movie going to be made? So I got the latest draft, and I go, Amanda, you're going to have a little bit of a drinking problem in this movie. They've changed. I just want to warn you, there's, your happy-go-lucky attitude, it's got to be fueled with alcohol, and you're going to have a lot of issues. Like, there's a lot of stuff that's going on with you, but it's great. Again, it made her, we needed to know, like, even me, when I talked to her, how do you get through your day when you're helping children cross over? And so Cayman is kind of piling on that. And then as another kind of caveat is I say to all the people that come in my orbit, my sister, my mother, my friends, I'm like, look, dude, anything you tell me is fair game. Like, I'm a writer now. So remember that time when and they're like, oh, I can't believe you remembered that. I'm the youngest of three. So the baby always listens, used to sit up at the top of the stairs and listen to everybody tell their stories. And I'm like, now it's payback time. Now I get to write the stories. So then that brings me to Fisherman's View. And this is the story that was my first novel. So what happened was I wrote the screenplays. They got optioned. There was another screenplay that was in between there. It was kind of a young adult story about a kid from the 80s that loved 80s movies. And then I wrote Fisherman's View. And the characters, has anyone read Fisherman's View? So the characters and again, all the books, please, just like getting them out into the atmosphere. So the Fisherman's View is a story about family, and there's a lot of passive aggressive Catholic guilt in this, and it's about a tough mother, not my mother, but it's about how children can grow up, brothers and sisters. You grow up in the same house with the same parents, and you're so different. Like, I'm so different from my brother and sister. But there's the core of love with each other, right? There's nothing that breaks the bond of your siblings, but you're so different, and you grow up and you're like, how did we grow up in the same house? Did you hear the same things? And so, again, as the caveat, there's a part in here about my sister, and she got in a fight with my mother, and my sister was reading it. She's like, I can't believe you put that in the book. I'm like, well, it's not your name. The family's from New York. They're Irish. We're half Italian. There's a disclaimer. So I try to like soften it. And then the funny part was my mother, who's still 94, she's going to live forever. Trust me, she's going to live forever. And when she read it, I was a little, she's actually, the story is a beautiful story of a woman who's just tough on her children. And it's just that passive aggressive. And the reason I came up with this story was I realized I'm 59. So at 55, when I wrote this, my mother still has the ability to cut me to my knees. She can say, oh, Michael, you've put on a little weight, which, it's COVID. Everybody put on a little COVID weight. But she can say something that has such power. And the opposite is true. She can say, oh, I'm so proud of you. And I'm like, wow, so the power of mothers. And so I'm like, okay, I'm definitely writing. I'm writing about this. And I remember my mother read it, and I was sort of like a hand grenade. I threw it over, and I was sort of, and she was funny. She's like, oh, Michael, that woman. And at the end, it's resolved. You realize why she was the way she is, and why she was hard on the children. And it's all fictional. But my mother calls, and I was waiting and she says, oh, I know who you were writing about. That Mrs. Horgan up the street, she was awful, wasn't she? And I'm like, yeah, Mom, she was really tough. She was really, and then my sister, so I pull in all these pieces. They're all pieces of your experiences. And I always laugh, or think about, I started writing when I was 50. Not even as a career, just I wanted to tell stories. Like my friend, I wanted my movie. I wanted the lights to dim and go, shh, here comes my movie. And I have 3 children. I'm a grandfather now. So at 30, 28, and 26. So when I was doing it, they were in their 20s. And they were like, you're going to be a writer now? And that was the great thing for me. They were like, you're writing, you can put books out, you can make a movie. I'm at 50. They're 28 and they think, oh, they have to figure out their lives. And I go, no, yeah. I'm not saying these are like Hollywood blockbusters, but you can do it. You can do it. You put down your story, write it. Things like this are just so much fun for me, right? People call. And so, and then I turn to them and I go, now realize you're going to be in these stories, a lot of stuff that we've gone through. I'm going to pour myself out, and it's all good. Although, my next book that I'm working on right now is based on my son, who's very open about his struggles with anxiety and OCD, more like intrusive thoughts. And it's been beautiful to write. So that'll be the next story that I put out. But it's all woven into, stories of my children, stories of people that I've experienced. And so Fisherman's View, the one we talk about today, was the one that I first wrote as a book. I'd started it as a screenplay, like all the others. And the nice thing about the screenplay format was it gave me the skeleton of the story. So, like I said, I just started becoming an author, so I don't know a lot about how other authors write. Maybe they sit and they just flow through, but with the screenplay, once that was completed, it was the It was the backbone. Like I knew it was the middle. I knew how it started. I had the image. I knew what was going to happen to the characters in the middle. And then I knew how the ending was going to be. So all I had to do was weave my way through there to get there. The challenge is, with a screenplay, it has to be condensed. A movie is all about dialogue, right? You can see a scene, like if it's at the Grand Canyon, but when you write it in a screenplay, you have to say Grand Canyon, right? But then the dialogue has to tell. So you've got to cut everything down. With the books, all the shackles were off. So when I got to Fisherman's View as a book, I'm like, okay, this one's going to be about us. It's going to, masked as my mom and my brother and sister. But I go, the shackles are off. Like I had already spent the last 4 or 5 years with Hollywood beating up my other stories. Everybody has an opinion, which is fine. I appreciate it. If it's going to move the story forward, if it's going to help. So like, oh, when crossing the Sagamore, why do they go to Cape Cod? Why don't they go to Newport? Or other things that just beat me up. So with Fisherman's View, I finally got to the point of, I'm just going to write this as a book. The shackles are off, and I'm going to just weave my story and be able to tell. And so that was the first book I put out, and it was great. It was so liberating. It was just people. It was a great response. People loved it. My mother loved it, which was big. Mrs. Horkin didn't like it so much, but it kind of validated me as a writer. A lot of my screenplays got picked up and they were winning awards and stuff. But now I'm like, you know what? No one's ever going to read my screenplay. I'm not going to bring a screenplay to my mother or my friends and go, hey, read this. But as a book, I'm like, I can get the stories out there, right? Everybody can self-publish. You can put picture books out. You can put poetry books out. So I go, I'm going to do this for me. I'm going to go back in and I'm going to dive into these stories and I'm going to just get them out into the atmosphere. So, so I finished Fisherman's View. And what was interesting, Fisherman's View in Sandwich, right? The restaurant. And so I gave him a copy and he was laughing. And I said, the original title was Fisherman's View. But when I looked at it, it looked like some guy's name, like the Mr. Fisherman, like Fisherman's View. He's looking out and it just didn't read right. So I changed it to A Fisherman's View. And so he loves it. And he's like, oh, I can sell these down at the store that's named after he thinks it's named after the restaurant. No, it's named after my mother. There's a lot of I have a lot of symbolisms. And then so I finished those and I'll give you a good example. I wanted to give you guys an example of writing. I know it's screenplay intensive, but the theme is that I started off with the screenplays and that gave me the backbone of a story. And then I'm like, okay, now I can weave. So I'll give you the biggest difference between writing a screenplay and writing a book, for me anyway. Because with a book, it was all, it's all about the details. You got to get and I realized I need to get it to at least 200 pages. Wide margins, double space, a lot of pictures. But I figured if I could get it to 200 pages, that's reason enough to spend $10.95. You know what I mean? I could do it. But I found with screenplay, I found myself, you got to condense, you got to take it out. Don't even have that scene. With a book, I'm like, I need to add stuff. I had to keep adding and adding. So here's just a good example of the difference between writing a book or writing a scene or a setting for a book and a screenplay. So this is the Crossing Guards. This is just an opening scene where they go in Quincy, Mass, right? So we'll put this. And honestly, this was the hardest part for me, was just adding more words. I have ADD anyways. Just get to the point. Let's go. Get to the story.
It's ADD.
So this is
ADD.
how you describe Quincy, Mass. And she goes to visit this elderly woman, Mrs. Wallace. So Quincy, Mass. The Wallace House is a charming, well-kept saltbox colonial in the Wollaston Beach section of Quincy, just south of Boston. The house is large and inviting, handsomely landscaped with trimmed bushes now covered by green plywood and brown burlap to protect them from the harsh South Shore winters. It's a neighborhood where the homes are old and stately and the air is clean and full of the nearby sea. There's a kind of mellowness in memory of another time and another America. Megan walks along the sidewalk and up the short asphalt driveway. Since she comes and goes at all hours, most of the families in her care give her a spare key. She turns the lock and enters a home that is immaculate but dated. The furnishings look brand new, as if they were just brought home from Jordan Marsh in 1978. Mrs. Wallace is a woman who appreciates the daily graciousness of life. So the Waterford crystal and china teacups are always set, waiting for someone, anyone, to pay this lonely woman a visit. Megan walks up the oriental carpeted stairs to Mrs. Wallace's bedroom, draping her coat and hat on an embroidered wingback chair sitting by the door. So that kind of paints a picture of the house. That's a book. In a screenplay, what that would say is interior bedroom, Mrs. Wallace. That's it. That's it. And then you'd go into the dialogue. And she says, hello, good morning. But with a book, you need to create all the images and all the nuances and the feelings, which was very freeing for me. So I could finally just open up. But the hard thing was meandering through all that with purpose. That was the most important thing, with purpose. So finally, my last book, or my most recent book, is based here on Cape Cod. So my wife and I moved down here. Well, my parents have a place in West Yarmouth, right on Lewis Bay. So I grew up there in the summers. And we took the house over and we sold our house in Medfield and moved down here full-time 3 years ago. Well, COVID refugees, right? Sold our place. We're like, what? You're gonna spend that much on this? Okay, great. So we moved down here, love it, full-time capers. But I've been coming here in the summer since 1970. So I wrote this story, which and are you familiar with the West Yarmouth area, Lewis Bay? The Captain Parker's and Skipper Restaurant and the Delaney family. So this one is called. And what's interesting in this image, the hardest part of this book was taking this picture, which my wife and I argued over the whole time. This is a glass of scotch on Lewis Bay as the sun was just setting. For hours, we're waiting for the perfect. You know how much scotch I had to drink to get down to that level right there? I'm like, honey, we have to get the perfect picture for this, for that. All my books are personal. They're based in some truth of someone I know. This one's very personal. This one is really about my dad worked in a factory in South Boston, 6 days a week. On the seventh day, he would just come to the beach and relax with us. But he would every night go down to the Lewis Bay with a glass of scotch, right at sunset, have a little sip. He'd go for a swim, let the ice melt a little bit. By the time he came up, the ice would have melted back up to where the schooner level is on the glass. And so it's a really nice kind of cathartic story. It's another Irish story. A lot of my stories weave music in them. So this one's all soft rock from the 60s. And my son worked at the Skipper Restaurant. It's over by the Red Jacket, the Delaney family. So Amy and Aiden Delaney are in this. And so it's really a story of mourning where the mother passes away and they have to save the bar. And, they all come back to the Cape. A lot of my stories involve death. This thing about death. But it's cathartic. Like it's all, crossing the bridges and crossing over. So this is my most recent. This is all about Cape Cod. A lot of memories of growing up, during the 60s and 70s down here when it was pretty much the Wild West, in the happy hour insaneness. But again, it's all rooted in family and how tight that bond is between siblings. No matter where you go in life, no matter what you become, there's still that bond that ties you all together. So those are the 5. I wrote a musical, which I'm not going to sing for you because my son plays guitar, but I'm actually writing his story now, which is about anxieties and OCDs. And it's been great. One of the fun things for me is like talking about the stories and just kind of getting them out there. One of the nice things, 2 summers ago, I did a book signing at the Yellow Umbrella up in Chatham. So it's funny, I'm sitting there and, I got the table set up and these 2 elderly women come meandering up. And she says, these 2 women come up and they look at me and they go, Michael? And I said, yes. And I recognized one of them and she goes, I'm Miss Doherty. So it was Miss Doherty and Miss Callahan. Miss Callahan lives in Centerville. My 2nd and 3rd grade teachers. They go, your mother called and said you were doing a book signing. And I'm like, oh my God, that's great. But do you want to know pressure? Have your 2nd and 3rd grade teachers read your work and tell you all the mistakes you made. Miss Callahan was like, Michael, this is grammatically incorrect. This is not how I taught you. This is not, Miss Callahan she was hard on me, but that was the fun part. Like just getting the stories out there for me has been great. They've been Cape Cod based, they've been family based. So again, as they're free, whichever ones you like, enjoy them. If you like them, share them with your friends, book groups, whatever. But it's been great. It's been a really fun experience. So thank you for listening. Thank you, Zoom.